We shall begin today's session with a keynote address, and it's titled, How to Have a Long, Fun Career in Software Testing. Please join me in welcoming Mr. John Hager, Systems Software Engineer and Tester, Consultant of Grand Software Testing. Dipersilakan.
So I like some level of interaction, which is hard with a big room, but we'll start out with, good morning. Good morning. Not good enough, try again. Good morning. Good morning. There you go, like that, thank you. James Whitaker, good friend of mine, who I've tried to kill skiing, by the way. If you come to United States, contact me. I like to try and kill testers off. It's good for my career movement. Up the ladder. But James Whitaker and I've had conversations over the year. If you ever get a chance to hear him talk, he's really good, much better than me. And he likes to tell stories. So I'm going to start out with a little story here. And it's about careers. That's what this thing is on. And how does that relate to testing as a service would be maybe a first question to answer. And I believe testing as a service is about providing that word service. If you think about other professions, service, maybe if you think about restaurants, service means the people that wait on you and help and cook and things like that, right? And there's all levels of restaurants and things like that. So while a lot of the talks, very important ones, have been on things like function points and estimating and how to set up services, which are all very part of the problem space. I believe actually to have a good testing as a service means having good testers, like the people in the audience here. So, the story. I started working back when I was a teenager, and my first job was in fact in the restaurant field. I started out, first job, and I was going to be a baker. I lasted about 2 weeks at that. Why? Because I have a natural talent for baking, but at that point, as a 19-year-old young man, my skill as a baker was rather minimal. And they realized that quickly, that the service I was trying to provide by baking was sometimes good and sometimes not so good. So they demoted me to busboy dishwasher. That's about the bottom, by the way. And from there, I've worked my way up to now talking in front of you. And so I think I've made some progress in the 40 plus years of working. Some of you heard me talk yesterday in other places. I'm coming up here on an anniversary with computers of 40 years somewhere in the next few months. Not sure exactly where it is, but I started writing my first programs and working with computers about 40 years ago. And in that time, I've had a lot of interesting jobs, and I like to think some fun. And I started getting questions a few years back, again, another story, from people that would say, what do you do? And I go, well, for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been what I call semi-retired, which means I only do things that make me really, really happy. And they were like, well, what does that mean? Well, I travel around the world, come to fun places like Malaysia with good food. I teach, which I really enjoy doing. I speak a little bit, I write a little bit. And if a job comes around that I think would be fun, I go do it. But I also, about once or twice a month, somebody goes, would you like this job? And I go, no, that doesn't sound like any fun. And so I have the luxury now of turning work down, which a lot of people at lunches and things like that were like, how did you achieve that? How did you get there? So I want you to think as I talk that it's big part of your job is to provide the service of testing, one level or another. But But I also want people to have fun in testing. Now, that doesn't mean that all the time it's nice and easy and that you have fun all the time. There's always, in any activity you do, some hard things that come along. But overall, you should be doing something that you enjoy. Life is too short to be doing things that you're miserable at. And I've known a few people that were miserable at their jobs, and I would, as a manager, always tell people, I think you want to move on. Go find something that's more to your liking. So have fun. That's a big part of the message here. But what's this, by the way? Roller coaster. Does anybody know how they test roller coasters? Show of hands. Anybody? Oh, you're going to learn something new. The technique for testing roller coasters is the first people that ride the roller coaster are the people that designed and built the roller coaster. Think about that a second. If it fails, which is likely to fail the first time, they're going to die. Does that motivate them, do you think? A little bit motivation there to do it right. And you'll notice there's a bug they're about to hit there. So, could get ugly in that roller coaster. But on the other hand, they seem to be having fun on the roller coaster till it comes off the tracks. Have fun, important. The next one is to grow. Now, a lot of you have various kinds of certifications, college degrees. Those are part of growth very early on. I had lots of college degrees and things. But I mentioned I've been doing this software and software testing for 40 years. I'm still growing. I get up and talk and things like that, and supposedly an expert. But as many things as I know, there's many more things in software and software testing that I don't know. So I'm constantly growing. I'm constantly learning on things. The other big one out there, and this was from Einstein, by the way, is he said one of the more important traits that you can have is to be curious. And I definitely like growing and being curious. So those are my first three big things to you: fun, growth, and curiousness. So now the engineer in me at some point came along and said, what were the things that I did? And one of the cool techniques that are out there, you can apply it in many places, are mind maps. This is a mind map of kind of how I did my cool test job over the years. Things came and went off of it. This is maybe more a snapshot of a few months ago when I started thinking about this problem. I would think your mind map and your career would look maybe different. That's okay. This is mine. But I think there's some things to be learned from this, so we're going to step through parts of this here. The cool John job branch shows here. And this is the thing that a lot of you have been already doing and working on, at least parts of it. And it kind of starts up there with the formal classes, conferences like this, degrees, going to school. I certainly went to school a lot till I got to the point where they made me start teaching school. And my college students, by the way, tended not to like me because I was teaching advanced classes. They would come in, they would take tests, and they would always say, what's the right answer to the test questions that you asked? And I go, well, it depends. The kind of tests I gave, there were no totally right or wrong answers. It's how you justified things. But that was formal education. It got them started on things. The other big thing that I found and noticed that I did throughout my career, and by the way, when I've told people at lunch that they would have to do something like this, they go, well, that's kind of hard work. That doesn't sound like fun. But I say at least 1 hour per day of kind of personal research. Now, you can do that on Google. You can do that on YouTube and looking at videos. You can have a rather large library of books. Is Rob Sabb in the room? He's talking various times today. And Rob Sabb tells me that he's inherited Kem Kaner's book set in the library, and I've seen Kem's, or at least parts of it, plus what already Rob had. So his library of books and research is much larger than mine. Mine's nonetheless pretty large. It's probably about 3, 4, 5 meters long and probably about 2 meters high of bookshelves loaded with books that I spend time reading, looking things up, probably more than an hour a day. Now people go, that's not fun, but remember my thing about being curious, okay? We want that to be curious on finding about things. And then informally, I talk with people. Talk with people here at the conference. Just talked with Tariq on things. And that is informal, being curious, and building up knowledge. That's very important. But I expanded it in my list here a little bit. I learned software. Like I said, about 40 years ago, I wrote my first program. That was an eye-opening experience, by the way, because computers are kind of stupid, aren't they? And after you program them a little bit and test them a little bit, you realize how stupid they are, because they will do exactly what some programmer tells them to do, even if it's not right. And of course, that's why we all have jobs to find those kind of bugs. So I learned a lot about software, continue learning about software. Been trying to learn Python here recently. Hard for an old dog like me to learn new languages, but I've been trying. Hardware. How many of you know anything about hardware and electronics and motors and actuators and things like that? Hardware is an important aspect. Now, sure, this is a generic kind of PC and things like that, but it's now talking to the outside world. We have cyber physical systems. Those that were in my track session yesterday heard about that. And I learned in my career that I had to know the software, the hardware, and then something called systems engineering. I started teaching first software testing and then software engineering. And then I started teaching some systems engineering classes and systems knowledge. And that's really the big picture kind of stuff, right? And to have all that takes a long time to build those things up. But knowing systems and things like that made me a better software tester, which I continue to learn. And then there's general knowledge that I put in there. Things like philosophy, things like history, even art, those kinds of things end up being important. Now, Dr. Nishi over here took us on some really wonderful tours last week in Japan. And one thing we went, another story here, to was a tea ceremony. And I was thinking this morning about what the importance of a tea ceremony is to software and software testing. And I realized the aspect of that that's important is there's a ritual there that they go through, and they spend years and years becoming first a tea ceremony student, and then they learn from a tea master. And there's very subtle meanings to the words and the gestures and things that are done. And as I think about that with something like software testing, I realize that there's a real strong correlation there, and that you have to understand some of the processes we do in software testing and some of the techniques that we do. And it really, you can get a basic understanding by reading a book and maybe taking a test and a certification, but the subtleties of the tea ceremony, and I would say the subtleties of the software testing world, take a lifetime to learn and master. And that's hard for a lot of us to understand. But I really thought the tea ceremony was kind of a beautiful way of indicating that. And I didn't do it very well, by the way. They had, and Dr. Nishi over here tells me that was one of the first times as a native Japanese person he's experienced that. But culturally, I think it was important for him to do that. It was certainly important for me to do that and relate it to this notion of software testing and having that general view of things is out there. So, in this gathering of knowledge, do you need to know all these things on this list? I'm not going to read these all, by the way. I did a session here last year on some of these things, talked about skills and knowledge. And it's a rather large list by Bernie Berger. There's a bunch of these floating around on the internet. There's a lot of good stuff in here. Some of these things I know. Some of these things I know really well. Some of them I'd have to go do some more work and research on. Again, I can build up that tea ceremony kind of expertise over time, which, by the way, I regard that as fun. Yeah, I may need counseling, but that's, to me, doing those things, learning those kinds of things, practicing is fun. But that knowledge is important, but it's only a start. What you really end up needing is practice. Practice, practice, practice. I think we should call it the software testing practice. Because sort of like other practices, you can spend a lifetime doing it. Doctors, they don't call it medicine, they call it the practice of medicine. They are all the time practicing medicine. Other professions, same thing. We as a profession, and we've moved from the time when I started out 40 years ago. By the way, there was no software testing practice and discipline and job title. We were just all programmers. You did it all. And, little story, first job about, 1979, working on a computer with punch cards. I know a lot of you have no idea what that is, but we used to program computers with paper. I kid you not, various kinds of paper. And I wrote a little program. I had a senior guy over me. We looked at it, thought it was good. I tested it a little bit, I thought. We went live with the thing. $50,000 later, US, we found there was a bug in there that production people had been using. Now, these days, $50,000 is a lot of money, but in those days, $50,000 in the US was the price of a house, a really nice house. Fortunately, they did not make me pay for that, because I was still a college student, I would have suffered. But it taught me that I didn't have much skill. I had a little bit of knowledge, but not much skill in software and not much more in software testing. Another analogy here. Some of you that were here last year probably saw this chart, but I really like it. Why? Because my alter ego is a guy named Duncan. My full name is John Duncan Hager. If you get my book, Duncan gets some credit, but Duncan's a ski bum. John's a software tester bum. I mean that affectionately. And for those of you in Malaysia, has anybody here in the room, except for the foreigners, ever seen snow? Come on, few of you seen snow. Where I live, it snows 6-7 months out of the year, and 5 months out of the year, there's snow on the ground. I love snow. I love skiing. This is a map. I had a mind map earlier. This is a map of a ski area. We have these things because the ski areas where I live in Colorado are so big that people get lost on them. They get lost. You come up and they're like, how do I get down? I took Dr. Nishi up skiing. Besides James Whitaker, I've tried to kill Dr. Nishi off too. I don't discriminate on who I take up skiing. I'd take you up too, Phil. but we have these maps. And the maps, you can't quite see it from here, but there's parts on the map over here that are green, which means it's for the easy beginner types. And there's parts over here that are called blue. The color designation means you got to have some skill and talent in skiing. And then this section over here, right in there, is known as a black zone. They run ski races down it. It's very steep, very brutal, and you go very, very fast if you're not careful. How does this relate to the skill of testing and knowledge? Well, I can take an easy route down, which is probably what most of you would want to start out if you ever tried skiing, is get a ski lesson, some training, from a certified instructor. By the way, I used to be a certified ski instructor. You start out on green. Don't even think about blue and black. Before I got married, I used to go meet women at certain times of year by finding them on black slopes. Laura knows this. My wife is up here, by the way. It's no big secret. But I would find some poor woman there crying on the slope whose boyfriend took him up, was going to teach him to ski. They got him up and said, "Go down, follow me," and they left. Didn't work well for them, worked well for me meeting women. I could tell all kinds of secrets here. So you'd want to stay on the green area. That's a black run. You would not want to do that. I love the black runs. I like going down them. I'm good at it. I've been doing that for years. And if you're an intermediate level, Dr. Nishi over here, pretty good intermediate skier, he'd go down the intermediate. Now, when he came out skiing, I took him up to the top of the mountain, and all this. These were all software testers and an expert. They were all like, "Oh, do you know where you're going? We're in trouble." And I was like, "I know where I'm going. I know how you guys ski." Everybody got down safely, right? Yes, he says yes. So there's many routes you could come down. Well, it's kind of like that in software testing. You could go to college, you could get on the job, you could work with standards, practice, gain the knowledge, and you become a skilled tester. That's one set of paths that somebody would come down to become a skilled tester. But there's other ones. Well, I mentioned you could go get more certifications. ISTQB now has how many certifications? You don't know. 8 or 9. When I started with them, set things up in America, we had 1. I think we were working on 2 or 3 by the time I left. We're up to 9. Certification's a route to go, but it's not the only one. You can do no formal schooling, a lot of hard work, a lot of study, a lot of practice, and all those things will get you to be an expert if you work at it for about 20 or 30 years. Now, the people at lunch would always go, "Do I have to work that long at it?" I think so. It's a practice. Now, maybe if you have a lot of talent, you could get there quicker, but most of us spend years and years and years doing this kind of stuff. We also took risks. Now, a word about culture. Some cultures, taking risks are kind of inherent into them. I'm a cowboy from the western United States now. We take risks. And my wife, you can confirm this with her, about once a year I come back from skiing and something's tore or broken and I break skis and she goes, "Act your age." Doesn't work well. And I'm in my mid-60s and the people I ski with we're all like little children still. But we took risks. Calculated risk. As much as possible, learn some of these things, take risks on these things. So, what do I mean by risks? Continuing with the ski analogy here. This is a ski slope, by the way. It's a little deceiving because that little dot, that little dot, that little dot, those are people. Okay, that's how far away this thing is. It's also deceiving. You see these things here? Those are cliffs, straight down drops of anywhere from 1 to 3, 4, 5 meters. So this is a ski slope, basically within the cliffs, very, very steep, where if you fall on this thing, you will fall a very long ways. I've seen this. Somebody falls and you fall 100, 200, 300 meters down the slope, leaving gear and things as you go. The trick is not to fall on that kind of stuff. And yeah, I just skied this slope and turned around to take this picture because I figured someday I'd have a good use for it. Now, why would you ski something like that? Becomes an immediate question. Most of you in the room are going, you know, I don't like snow, certainly don't like jumping off of cliffs. What is wrong with you people? You get to a certain level of ability and talent and skill, this becomes fun. Remember my thing of having fun? Now, pretty much everybody in the room would not regard this as fun, but I do. Now, yeah, I probably, again, need some counseling, but, oh, yes, this is the result of not having the skill, by the way. This is a person crashing on skis. If you look very closely, he's about to do what we call a face plant. He's going to put his face in the snow. By the way, when you do that, it's very cold. Even for those of us that are used to cold. You also come out of this usually kind of hurt a little bit, shaken up. And now you're all thinking, that definitely is not fun. For some of us, we kind of, once you survive that, it is fun because you get a big adrenaline rush and things like that because you realized you lived. And there's something strange about humans, but if you live through something like that, it becomes fun for some of us. This relates to what are known as personality types. There's various personality profiles. The people that like doing this are known as type A's or adventure seekers. And they're a lot of my friends. I border on it. I'm not overly into it. But you'll also notice right here that there's been an equipment failure. We use tools. I'll talk more about tools in a minute. But I think he probably is crashing because he broke a ski. We don't break skis often. I break them once every 3 or 4 years. It's not something that most skiers do, but he's done it, and it's going to be painful. Difference between talent and skill. I had some native talent in skiing. I don't remember not skiing. I was on skis at age 4. I have dim memories of not being able to ski. I didn't go to a ski area to age 5, but I always was on skis, which probably is why I'm pretty good at it, but I'm still learning. Remember, growth and learning is part of, I still learn things today on skiing. But talent gets you started, but doesn't give you skill. Now, Will Smith, an American actor, does lots of movies and things like that. Some good movies, some not so good movies, but he does a lot of pretty good movies. And he said, talent you have naturally. So I evidently had some talent for skiing and things like that. A little bit on riding bicycles, but Phil up here rides bicycles. And I do too, but I get off on bikes and walk down a lot of slopes because I don't have the skill for it. But he said, skill is only developed by hours and hours and hours of beating on your craft. I like that thing. And I want to, again, encourage you. This is a thing on how to have fun and build your career. Don't think that you're going to become a good tester or even an adequate tester, or certainly not an expert tester, without practice over a lot of hours. Yes, people go, isn't there a shortcut? No, there's no shortcut that I know of. It takes a lifetime to do this. And the thing I will tell you, if testing software were easy, you would not get paid good money to do it. There's lots of easy jobs out there, and they don't pay a lot. So be glad, because you can get good money for testing. So the moral of this particular story is if you're going to do hard things in software testing, or skiing as the story was. You want to practice. You want to know where the cliffs and the danger points are to avoid the crash. But I can do what I do on skis because I practice. How much would be a fair question. The last 4 years, I've skied about 100 days a year. That's a lot, by the way. Over my lifetime, I figure I've skied somewhere on the order of about 4 or 5 years of my life. Number of days have been spent skiing. Obsessive, according to my wife up here, who reminds me constantly that I'm too obsessive. But obsessions on some things are good. Obsession on becoming a good software tester will be good for your career, is part of my story here. Oh, and by the way, whoops, the little kids here, they actually do have fun doing this. When I was a ski instructor, some of the coolest people I ever had were like children that really wanted to learn to ski. Some didn't want to learn to ski. We advised them to go find another sport. So, the skill stuff. I realized I started as a novice when I cost that $50,000 bug. Later on, they hired me into a nice big company because I was at least effective. And in those days, in the early 1980 timeframe, they didn't run into a lot of people that knew software, knew programming, and even knew what test was about. So I got hired really, really quick, which was strange, but it happened. I practiced and practiced. I became advanced. At some point, and a couple speakers yesterday mentioned this, I had what some of us call an epiphany. I realized about 10 years in, I guess more 12, 13 years into software, that I didn't know much. Okay? And then I went back and started going back to school and learning more, and I'm still learning that. But I also took risks on testing. So how does this relate to the ski stuff? Well, we have these levels on slopes. I mentioned it. Green, blue, black. We have something called double black, which basically means if you go there and don't know what you're doing, you can get hurt really bad under certain. So we call that expert only and try and keep the general public out of those things. In terms of software testing, what are some notional? I think you can get the basics on software with about 80 hours or so of schoolwork, which is where a lot of you started out at, or some certification classes and conference. Not a lot, but you are just a novice. About 500 hours to become effective, about 1,000 plus hours to become advanced. And by the way, some people spend all of their careers and lives quite happy being just effective and maybe advanced a little bit. Nothing wrong with that. You don't all have to become experts. In fact, you got to be a little bit like the skier, willing to take the risks and crash a lot to become the expert. There, I think it's like 5,000 to 10,000 hours. That's a lot of time, by the way, to spend doing that. That's the kind of stuff I've done notionally to get good at that stuff. From that, I can ski all the things I want to ski. I can do lots of things with software testing. I get to now travel and teach and help people. I do a lot of this to help on things. So, discipline. Next thing that I believe I developed is I built discipline. Now it's interesting. I find a lot of people come into software testing from other fields. I know some people that came in from history. I know some people that came in from music. I know people that came in from art into testing and software testing. And how is that possible? Well, if you think about those things I just named, like the tea ceremony, there's discipline. Software testing takes discipline. And these people coming in learned a discipline, and then they learned they could pick up another discipline like software testing. Aspects of the discipline, things like martial arts and music and art are non-test disciplines I think are good to pick up. Critical thinking, certainly hard work. And by the way, I regard hard work as fun. I'm going to talk here in a moment about career plans. And then my chant Practice, practice, practice. So, I think I'm doing okay on time. Few more areas to briefly talk about. Thinking and passion and challenges in testing. Testing's hard. That's a good thing. Again, I mentioned you get paid more money for it. But it's a challenge. I like that. I like challenges. I like to look for new challenges. So, like I said, I've been learning Python. That's definitely a challenge because it's a very different language than I'm used to. And for me, it's the journey, not the end. So once I learn Python, I'll go learn something else. It's the journey. It's the activity of doing these things that are important. I'm a big believer in the notion of passion. I hope you realize I'm very passionate about software testing and helping you all get better. That's a passion of mine. I like to search for excellence. Somebody yesterday, I think it might have been Phil, mentioned, was it Tom Peters? He wrote some other books. I think he did In Search of Excellence as one of his books that I remember reading. I like looking for excellence. I never get there, by the way. It's like this practice thing. I never get there. I took interesting jobs in my career, things that were a little bit different. I moved from software to software testing to systems engineering. I then moved into training. So I pushed myself a little bit, took those risks, took interesting jobs. Communicate. That's what you're doing here. You can speak, you can talk to others. You don't have to be standing up in front of everybody. But more importantly, with the communicate, as much as talking, it's listen. I hope some of you have been listening. The studies would show that most of you have tuned in and out several times during this. That's okay, but if you come back and listen a little bit now and then, you'll get something. Building relationships. The day of programming done by a guy wearing sandals and a t-shirt that had holes in it and blue jeans, pretty much gone in places all over the world. Now we work in teams, agile teams. We have to have those relationships to make this stuff work. And passion. When you do that, doors will open. I was fond of looking for the doors that were opening. But first and foremost, once the door does open, be a good observer. I mentioned this now several times here and other things. I tend to be a keen observer of what goes on and what's going on in the room and the places and environments. By the way, if you're interested in software security testing, being a good observer is key. I think all software testing needs to be good observers, but that's important. Change. A lot of people in many places these days, particularly aspects of the US, are afraid of change. You are in an industry that change is guaranteed. I mentioned the first computers I worked on were big pieces of iron that were programmed with cards, had almost limited access to terminals, no network connections to speak of. It evolved first to PCs. I bought my first PC in 1979 when it was still regarded as a hobby toy. In those days, I was the envy of all my college friends because I had one, and it had a modem. I could talk to the rest of the world. They thought that was amazing. I never guessed that most of the civilized world would be walking around with instant communication and a computer in their pocket. I thought things would be amazing, but this thing is, more amazing than I happened. That's change. And it's only accelerating. It's getting more and more. You have to manage that, okay? You got to work with that and not be afraid. You have to look for diversity in change. I love coming to other countries and understanding, first off, you have really good food here. That's a problem. And yeah, you got a break right after this, to go get some food. but I like the food here. I like the food in Japan. I like the food in China. That's one of my big problems is I like the food everywhere because that diversity is good. Help others. I'm really here to help. I don't need to come here, but I like to come here. I enjoy it. I find passion in what I'm doing. And so my wife and I tell people in the classes, email us, contact us, send us questions. We will try and help. We really mean that. That's not just something we say lightly. Now, sometimes, by the way, we'll send you to somebody else because I don't know everything. And you may ask a question and I don't know the answer. And by the way, sometimes you're going to ultimately ask a question. I do this now. And the other experts will go, that's a really good question. Nobody knows the answer. Have a fun time researching it, which is in some areas like security left me very, very nervous and scared when I had security people that I was looking to tell me the answer said, no, we don't know the answer. You go figure it out on that. And communicate part 2, as well as listen, speak in the local groups, write, even if it's just emails or blog postings or Twitter. I tweet a little bit, but I have a hard time saying anything meaningful in 140 characters. My mind doesn't shrink that small. Read, think, and repeat. I'm constantly checking things. So I mentioned a career plan. Now, a lot of companies say you have to have a career plan and have it. Before I ever was required to do that, I've had a career plan for 40 some years, probably even longer. And I'll show you some of the ideas here, give you a little bit. Family was important to me, but I also had to have fun. You need a job to pay bills and to live, but make sure you're doing a job that you have fun at. If you're not having fun at software testing, there's other cool jobs out there in IT that you can go do. Work on your weaknesses, okay? You got to know what those things are. I was constantly having the things that I needed to work on, both in the test realm, software test realm, and the non-testing area. Work on those things. And if a door opens, walk through it, at least to see what's on the other side. If the door doesn't open, maybe knock and get it open. My wife will tell you I've knocked on many doors and created many situations for myself because I was like, I want to go do that. And sometimes it takes knocking for a while before that door opens, but things will open. Little exercise here. This is a thought exercise. We're not going to do this, but I want you to think about this. Think about this during coffee break and when you get home, or maybe tonight. What software test skills don't you have that you want to have? Okay? You need to know what those are. Write them down. I had them in my career plan. Sometimes they were languages, sometimes they were tools, sometimes they were techniques. But if you don't write that stuff down, I don't know about you, but I'm an old person, I forget things. So I constantly write things down. I have long lists. I lose my list, right, Laura? And I become panicked. Where's my list? Where's my list of things both to do and to go learn? So, second part of the thought exercise here. Most of you, when I talked about skiing, thought maybe some tools. These are one of the tools of skiing. Those are skis, right? That's like fundamental tool of skiing. And pretty much everybody, even though none of you are probably really skiers or even seen snow, you went, yeah, you need those things, those skis. But what other tools might you need in skiing? Think about that for a second. Anybody got other ideas on tools for skiing that the industry has? So, let me show you one of them I bet nobody in the room, unless you've seen this before, thought of. These are heavy equipment. The one over here, that is what's known as a snowcat. We use it at the ski areas to groom the ski runs. It is a bulldozer made for snow. It can float over snow that you would sink into. My wife will tell you the story last winter we were pulling neighbors out, because I own one of these things. She got off of the snowcat to go help him and sunk into your waist. The snowcat's sitting up here and she went boom, down into the snow. It floats over snow. It is a tool that helps people ski and things like that. A bulldozer for snow. This is another bulldozer. We have so much snow in Colorado, you have to plow the roads and the driveways and the parking lots to get to the ski areas. And sometimes there's so much snow, you can't do that. But we have to have tools like that to enable skiing. Moral of this story is most of you think of the obvious thing when I say software testing skills, tools, and knowledge. But what are the not obvious things? Those are the areas to work on, become knowledgeable and an expert in, because someday somebody's going to want that skill, and if you've got it, you've got a job. Okay? That's how you get those jobs. So, continuing with it. Write those 3 things down on a piece of paper. Take them home with you. Write it down later. Do that. Okay? Now, I know maybe 10 of you will do that. A few will think of it. But I always had these career plans written down. 3, 4, 5 times a year, I'd get them out. I'd say, I got that one done, need to work on this one. And I was constantly moving along. And people, when they asked me, how did you get to where I am? About 20, 30 years ago, I had a career plan that said I wanted to speak publicly and teach classes. I think I achieved that career plan because I get to do that. It took me a long time to get there. And by the way, I have fun. I enjoy doing this. So, personal checklist, exercise when you get home. Conduct a personal assessment, please, if you want to continue. You got to know where you are. You got to know where you want to go in the future. Okay, you got to do those things. Have a 2-year plan and maybe a 5 or a 10-year plan on things. Have those plans. And if you're not sure, ask some of the experts in the room. Look at some of those skills lists that are out on the internet. Find a mentor or a coach. I've been mentors for lots of people. And we can do that just with a few ideas and suggestions. I have had mentors that helped me. I call myself a second-generation software person. I had mentors that were first-generation software people. The very first software tester, or at least the person that gets credited as one of the first software testers, Jerry Weinberg, is still alive today. You're in a field that's that young. The guy that did the first software testing as a career and wrote books on it, still alive today. You can find those mentors out there and those role models. Jerry Weinberg, he's one of my hero role models, by the way. Have that career plan, have a mental plan and the roadmap, and be honest with yourself. Don't kid yourself on this, because it's only for you. The pragmatic tester, summarizing here a little bit, no programming. I know a lot of you who don't know programming, are afraid of programming, but as the industry evolves, I think programming's going to be a good thing to have. Practice, like medicine, practice. Think like that snow stuff. It's a good analogy to think about. Knowledge, tools, build your skills, context thinking. What works for you and your job and your company may not work for somebody else somewhere else. Grow. And know the guidelines and the rules and the procedures and the standards. But one of my definitions of expert, by the way, somebody that knows all that stuff, but then knows how to work with the rules and maybe even violate them sometimes. I know that sounds scary, but everything has an exception. So there was my career plan. I'm not going to go through all this. Thought I had till 10:30 or so. I've got a few more minutes. That's the mind map that I came up with. I could add to it. I could delete it a little bit. I stepped through most of it. And I'm giving her a chance to come up without falling down. Do we want to take some questions, or do we have time for that? 7 minutes. My wife's been up here the whole time telling me time and telling me to speed up. She's my editor and right now my timekeeper. So any questions? Oh, you are always so nervous. Sharif. Did I get that right? It's Sharif, right? Yeah. See, I can remember some names.
Okay, nice information on presentations over here. But on the starting as journey for the tester, you have shared some, for example, over here, the risk, manage the change, everything is there.
A little louder.
But, okay. You have mentioned about risk and also the manage to change. What could be the threat, for the testers?
The
threat? To say that for them to grow as an expert or become advanced level, what could be the threat of today's, for example, like maybe the social media become a threat to them because they spend too much time on social media. That do you think that this would be the threat for the industry? Thank you.
I think, well, social media is one of those things that's like a good side and a dark side, right? So it could be a threat if all you do is spend all your time on social media and doing postings and things like that. So that could be a threat. But I also pay attention to social media, follow a lot of Twitter, follow a lot of LinkedIn, follow some blogs. All those things are social media. So I think that's kind of the good side because it's a bit of useful information. But another threat that social media offers is don't believe everything you see on the internet, right? And a lot of people, my brother-in-law for one, if he sees something on social media, it becomes the truth. And then a week later he finds out it's not the truth. So I think there's a good side and a dark side. But other threats to software testers that I see that I think you all need to be aware of. Tariq mentioned artificial intelligence, and along with that, things like automation and things like that. I think, and he mentioned the industry and the jobs are going to change, right? That's all very true. Now, when I was in school 40 years ago, people were like, oh yeah, artificial intelligence is going to put us all out of work. It didn't happen in 40 years. But the job has changed, okay, over the time. So things like manual testing, there will always be some job for good, skilled manual testers and good exploratory testing. Because I think we have yet to figure out how to have computers, which follow what's known as the von Neumann architecture, by the way, have the amazing multiprocessing that the human brain goes on. The number of connections up here are just hard to fathom. So I think there'll be an aspect of testing that will always continue for that. But when I hear testers tell me, oh, I don't want to learn coding, or I don't want to learn modeling, which, by the way, you don't have to learn software code, but you can do something like learn software modeling and modeling languages, which are very visual and totally different. I think learning those kinds of things would be good skills to be working on because some aspects of our job are going to change. They have changed in the 40 years I've been in there. So I see some of those things maybe as threats. I always like to call them opportunities as much as threats. Since this is a conference on testing as a service, I think there's certainly now a global aspect to software and software testing. And how do countries like Malaysia and companies in Malaysia compete with Europe and India and China? I almost don't like that word compete because it does inspire a threat kind of thing. I think those can all be positives, but they can be negatives too. I think we have to learn how to work with each other, and some of that goes to having the right skills, having the right niche, knowing things like I was just mentioning, because there you can be ready when the opportunity opens up. And by the way, right at the moment in the US, I hear different numbers, but there's something like 700,000 open jobs in the IT industry, okay? That's a big opportunity, and everybody wants to get into that. And I've got like a minute or two now. Any other questions? And by the way, I know culturally you don't like asking questions in public, but come up to me and talk to me afterwards, and I promise Laura doesn't bite. I can't promise about me. And I think we're now at a break too, aren't we?
Yeah, we have a break.
Okay. Thank you.
Terima kasih. Thank you very much to John Hager. Thank you for the life lessons, life reminders, and also the tools to navigate as our journeys will continue to present us all these challenges. And so we have a break now. You can catch Mr. Hager over coffee, and please come back in about half an hour for the next keynote.